we're going to cover hardware and Moore's Law. And a really easy way for you to remember the core tenets of Moore's Law is just what you see right here. Faster, cheaper. Okay, so let's remember what hardware even is. Hardware is simply the physical components of information technology, what you can actually touch. And in modern times, there are seemingly endless examples of hardware. And you probably remember that hardware can't really do anything on its own. It does need software to give it instructions and tell it what to do. But hardware is still a really interesting topic in its own right, and it's actually in chapter 5 in your textbook, that it talks about hardware, but it's mostly through the lens of Moore's Law. And as you read through chapter 5, it might strike you that some of the content is a bit more technical, so talking about things like optical fiber and silicon dioxide. For the typical business student, you don't have to get into the deep science of all of these concepts, but the chapter just does still talk about a lot of concepts that you should know, and I'm going to, highlight some of these in this video. Okay, so many of the examples pictured on an earlier slide are all just modern day technologies. So your chapter does a pretty good job of talking about the evolution of computing over time through 6 waves of computing, starting in the 1960s. So in the 1960s was the first wave, and this was really marked by mainframe computers, which were, really massive and took up entire rooms. They're also very expensive, so they were really only accessible and affordable to governments and large corporations. And then in the 1970s, there were more organizations adopting mini computers because they were more affordable than mainframe computers. And this is also the era when some of the core tenets of Moore's Law really took hold and could be observed. And then the 1980s is a third wave, and this is more of the desktop PC revolution in the workplace. So this is when it was more common to see employees with some sort of desktop PC at work. And then the 90s brought these, desktop PCs more to the household as well, so not just in the workplace, but kind of a core defining tech feature of the 90s, and this fourth wave was the internet, which revolutionized, the entire world and definitely left its mark on business. So many of you have probably heard of the, the dot-com bubble and the dot-com bust. So it's like the mid to late 90s when there was the dot-com bubble. And this is when a lot of internet tech companies called dot-coms entered the market en masse, and many of these companies were overvalued and many of them failed, which contributed to a stock market crash. But some of the companies actually did survive, like Amazon and eBay. And then the fifth wave of computing is marked by mobile computing. So this is when cell phones became really mainstream, and then, that led to smartphones as well being very common. And now we're in the sixth wave of computing, which is known as pervasive computing or ubiquitous computing, because technologies have become so fast and so cheap that many people and organizations are able to, incorporate these in their daily lives. And we're also seeing a lot of technologies being embedded in products in really innovative ways. And so the book also talks about a seventh wave of computing around the corner, which may have things like driverless cars. Some tech folks like to look at these waves in a more simplistic manner. So this is just showing kind of like 3 waves. Still starting with mainframe computing, but, marking that more in terms of one computer, serving lots of different people. And then moving on to personal computing, which is more about, one computer to one user. And, the current stage we're in now, ubiquitous computing, is marked by a single user having many different computing devices. So it kind of, covers similar concepts just from a slightly different perspective. Okay, so did it strike you how quickly technology advanced through those 6 waves of computing? So all of that can be explained by Moore's Law, which was named after Intel founder Gordon Moore. And the gist of this concept, which is not really a law, but more of a prediction, is that chip performance per dollar doubles every 18 months. Put simply, this is just saying that the speed and processing power of computers is increasing exponentially, while at the same time prices are decreasing. So again, faster, cheaper is really the core takeaway from Moore's Law. But it's not just chip technology that sees this price performance trend. Data storage doubles every 12 months, and it's been observed at times that networking speeds can double every 9 months. So for a lot of tech, this idea of, this price performance trend holds. And you can see on this chart displayed here, time is shown in the x-axis, and price as a function of performance is shown in the y-axis. And you can really just think of the y-axis as kind of, more bang for your buck. So you can see how that is increasing over time with different technologies. There are definitely many positives to Moore's Law and, this price performance trend, even with other technologies. So today, technology is much more widely available to poor and underserved communities around the world. Some 80% of the world's population now lives within range of a cellular network, and the vast majority of mobile subscriptions are now in developing countries. Also, the price elasticity of technology allows firms to innovate and open new markets. So for example, the textbook talks about how cheap mobile technology has opened new markets in China and East Africa. And price elasticity just refers to this concept that demand is really responsive to price. So as prices decrease, demand goes up. And we've definitely seen that with lots of technologies. Low-cost tech can also improve healthcare quality while also lowering costs at the same time. And so your book talks about lots of different examples from, smart pill bottles that flash when it's time to take your medicine to even smart pills that can help capture your vitals, like your heart rate, or take images of your internal organs. Despite all of the positives of Moore's Law, there's also a dark side. One of the major areas of harm stemming from Moore's Law is e-waste, which is defined as discarded, often obsolete technology, also known as electronic waste. Because technology advances so quickly, we see rapid obsolescence and depreciation of these technologies. And so what happens to all of this obsolete technology that nobody wants anymore? It generally becomes just tech junk thrown away in landfills, which is pretty concerning considering how toxic and hazardous a lot of these materials are. The stats highlighted in the textbook are pretty alarming. Each year, the planet generates over 50 million tons of e-waste. Without radical intervention, annual e-waste is expected to double in the next 3 decades. And e-waste volume accounts for about 42 pounds of tech junk per person each year. To make matters worse, most e-waste is dumped in developing countries. China was once recycling some 70% of the world's e-waste, but this was being processed in really unsafe conditions and was polluting a lot of its environment in those areas. So in these areas, safe drinking water had to be brought in from 20 miles away. Pregnancies were 6 times more likely to end in miscarriage, and 7 out of 10 kids had high levels of lead in their blood. So since around 2017, China stopped accepting e-waste and a lot of other e-waste. But what that meant was that a lot of e-waste just got rerouted to other developing countries, mainly Southeast Asia and Africa. E-waste actually contains a lot of precious metals that are valuable. A ton of discarded smartphones actually contains more than 100 times the amount of gold than a ton of ore. And in 2016 alone, it was estimated that e-waste contained more than $65 billion worth of precious metals. So compared to mining these precious metals from the earth, it would actually be 13 times cheaper to extract these same metals from e-waste and would produce far less CO2 emissions. The catch is we would have to figure out a way to implement an effective and efficient recycling system for e-waste. So why haven't we figured this out yet? One problem is lack of effective environmental legislation. As of 2020, around 70 different countries have enacted some sort of e-waste legislation. But in the United States, there is no such, federal e-waste legislation because this is all handled at the state level, and not all states have actually adopted any sort of e-waste legislation. And another problem that your book talks about is fracking. Because the cost of natural gas is so low, it's used to make cheap plastic that's about as affordable as really low-grade recycled plastic. And the book also just talks about bad actors who put, profits above principles. So what are the solutions? So one idea discussed in your book is that both consumers and manufacturers have to be just a lot more thoughtful and change the way that they think about electronics. So it's an issue on both the demand side and the supply side. So on the supply side, can we manufacture components that have longer life cycles? And then there needs to be some serious consideration given to the end of life cycle of these products so that they are disposed of and recycled properly. Should also check out the section of the book that talks about the e-Stewards program, which can help locate certified recycling facilities for e-waste. This is important because an investigation by the U.S. Government Accountability Office found that 43% of American recyclers were willing to sell e-waste illegally to foreign countries. Your book talks about how tech itself can be part of the solution, from smart dumpsters to tracking devices for e-waste to even robotics and machinery that could help actually perform the recycling process of disassembling these devices and routing the materials to where they actually need to go for, proper recycling and handling. And obviously, if a huge bottleneck is that we don't have any federal legislation for e-waste in the United States, folks can continue to push for this legislation. While Moore's Law has lasted as a pretty accurate prediction for a long time now, it's also predicted that Moore's Law is going to have to end because chips can't get smaller forever and can't be shorter than a single molecule. Scientists aren't quite sure when this is going to happen, but some are even predicting that it's going to happen within the next 10 years. So how are scientists preparing for this? There's much being done already, actually. So scientists are concentrating on improving the semiconductor material that the chips are made of. They're looking at making hyper-efficient chips out of carbon nanotubes. Looking at sending signals via light rather than electricity, and experimenting even with biological material. The book also talks about quantum computing. Rest assured that scientists are working on solutions, some which may actually far surpass the possibilities that we've seen with Moore's Law. With Moore's Law intact, the textbook talks about so many of the amazing advances that we've already seen with technology. In Chapter 5 alone, many of these novel technologies are discussed, from smart umbrellas to Snapchat spectacles to smart billboards that can detect the demographics of people who pass by the billboard and dynamically change the ads on the fly to target advertisements to those people's specific demographics. The chapter also talks about Raspberry Pi, which is a very compact, low-cost computer that can run the Linux operating system and function as a standalone computer. And it's super cheap and really awesome. So I may have mentioned that my daughter majored in art at CSU. And so I wanted to share with you this really cool gizmo that she made for me as a surprise gift. She made this when she took a digital fabrication class. And in her class, she learned how to use CAD software and 3D printer, because even in a field like art, technology is still really important to learn. And she installed Raspberry Pi and specific software to convert it into a gaming device for me. And just so you know, she's never had any interest at all in going into a technical field. And she only did kind of okay in her math classes. But even she was able to learn completely on her own how to design and create this really cool gadget for me. Aside from these examples, the chapter talks about many more novel technologies, including a final section that talks about the business case of Disney and its implementation of what are called magic bands. Okay, so I'll close with some final thoughts. A major takeaway from this chapter is that what is impossible from a cost or performance perspective today may be possible in the future. So supply chain, what does it mean for transportation and logistics if there are driverless fleets? And marketing, what's on the horizon with marketing analytics? And where will we go with machine learning and artificial intelligence? It used to be that we would tell business students that, technology might indeed displace the human workforce in certain job roles and tasks, especially those that are more repetitive or even dangerous in nature, because technology generally does a much better job of performing those tasks. And so we've already seen that a lot with automation. But, we've always kind of held this idea that job roles and tasks that require a lot of, intellectual work or, knowledge work is what we'd call it, that, these are safe because technology isn't capable of replicating those sorts of human tasks. But for how long will that hold true? Is my job even safe? Maybe when your kids are in college, they'll be taught by professor bots. Okay, so I'm kidding. Or am I? But seriously, I can honestly say that in my lifetime, I have seen so many technological advances that I once would have thought, were sci-fi, and then they became reality. In fact, 20 years ago in Atlanta, I went to this tech trade show, and I was floored by the technology that I saw being demoed there. It was stuff that you literally would only see from a sci-fi movie, and yet there it was, fully functional and on display for all of us to interact with and check out. And so many of these innovations I haven't even yet seen come to the market yet, but I do know, because I saw with my very own eyes, that, companies have already developed a lot of these technologies and they, work. So who knows? Who knows what's on the horizon? So my question for you is, what do you think about all of this? What are some futuristic technologies that don't exist today that you think will absolutely exist in the future? And how are we going to be able to solve a lot of the problems that come with all of these rapid technological advancements like e-waste? Lots of things to ponder.